Hello, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on how far east or west you are in the time zones. For those that don't know me, there we go, do that. That'll stop feedback going on. Okay, so try again. For those that don't know me, I'm Brian Tucker. I'm principal consultant at Eva Jacobson International. I've been teaching and coaching the Scaled Agile framework for an awfully long time. I've been with the framework since its nascent beginning some 15 years ago as a drawing in the frontispiece of Dean Leffingwell's book on Agile software requirements. In that time, I've supported clients in most engineering industries, be it software or hardware, regulated and unregulated environments. And in terms of teaching, I was one of the first people outside of Scaled Agile entitled to teach implementing safe and certify safe practice consultants. I've run that course almost 130 times over the last 10 years, more than anyone else in the world. Indeed, I'll be running one with my colleague Keith next week. If you're watching this on replay, we'll probably still be running one sometime soon, so check the website. Now, there should be time for questions at the end. Feel free to utilize the question and answer button within Zoom, and we'll pick some of those up and answer those in the half hour or so we've got at the end. This is the first in a series of webinars that look at the primary backlog items within SAFE: epics, features, stories. This webinar covers epics, changing the business. In 3 weeks' time, on the 1st of August, we'll examine features, potentially releasable points which change systems, solutions, services, or products. And then on the 8th of August, it'll be the turn of my colleague Keith de Mendonça to cover stories, changes to the underlying artifacts that make those systems or solutions. Now, those artifacts could be a code base, could be mechanical or electrical designs, marketing copy, or the documentation that supports all of the above. But that's for next month. Now, the QR code here gets you a printable version of the Ready Reckoner on the right. Keep an eye out for those throughout the presentation. They link to additional information supporting the topics being discussed. We should probably understand what epics are before we try to make them better. And before we go any further, we need to talk about backlog management tooling, particularly backlog management tooling that has been configured for small-scale teams and is using the traditional definition of epic, which was a big story. Safe epics are not big stories. Safe has features that fill the big story space, but even then, features are more than big stories because they're potentially releasable points. Put your tooling naming conventions aside as we start to explore what epics are. Business agility is all about changing the business so that it can seize opportunities and respond to threats. Changing the business involves everyone in the business changing themselves so that collectively the business is better. So the business agility value stream represents what the organization needs to do. It's not the process for a small team of change agents off to one side. It's everyone changing themselves. In SAFE, the organization is represented by the portfolio and all of the value streams within it. It's not a perfect mapping because a SAFE portfolio by definition is just the development value streams, not the operational value streams. But ultimately, the development value streams are changing the system, solutions, services, or products. So the operational value streams that are using those systems, solutions, services, or products can themselves change. Everyone in the organization ultimately is involved in some manner. The work items, the change requests within a SAFE portfolio are epics. Significant changes to what the business can do or how it does what it already does. They are this business agility value stream. The sensed opportunity is formed into an epic. The epics are given approval to negotiate work into the development value streams, which is funding the MVP. This allows the epic to run the experiments to prove the hypothesis behind the opportunity the epic represents. And by connecting to the customer and delivering the MVP, we can understand whether that hypothesis is proven. If the hypothesis is proven, then the epic continues development until it achieves the business outcomes, or it is abandoned and another opportunity is pursued instead. To pursue opportunities, it is necessary to change the business, and epics are the token that represents that change. The epic hypothesis statement is the format of an epic, or at least this is where it starts. And every epic that has started its life cycle will have the same epic hypothesis statement at the top, allowing them to be compared and ultimately prioritized. Epics that are later in their life cycle will have more detail, a business case, and even actual metrics backing up that hypothesis. But that's later. This is the starting point that captures the idea. It's a deliberately different format to features and stories. That way you can tell them apart instantly. You know from the representation that this is business change. That said, there is commonality between all of the backlog item formats in that they try to describe what, why, and who, but not necessarily in that order. Safe epics use the elevator pitch, first proposed by Geoffrey Moore in his book Crossing the Chasm. For people who are trying to do something, the named thing is a thing that does something. And unlike our competition, our existing product, or the fact we don't have anything at all at the moment, this is better because. It's that last line that is most important. The rest is just providing the context, but the last line describes the change, why this will be better than before. And remember that epics are change requests. They're not for maintaining steady state. That can be delegated outwards towards the edges of the organization. The edges can maintain themselves. How do we know that the change is happening and when it's complete? We need metrics, and that's what's below the dividing line. Business outcomes for assessing whether the change has ultimately been successful, but because business outcomes are typically lagging indicators, they only start moving once the work has been done. We're also looking for leading indicators, early measurements, often experiments to determine whether the hypothesis is true. The epic hypothesis statement is just the beginning. All epics start there. Beyond that point, epics have a life cycle that they go through. They start out being requested, either top down from activities to set the future vision of the portfolio, or bottom up as development value streams identify improvements to the products, solutions, or services that they own. Forecastable is where the epic hypothesis statement is developed. And if you add some initial estimates to that, then that's just enough information for use in road mapping and participatory budgeting. Remember, just enough, just in time. You don't want more than the description and the initial estimates, because if there's no capacity or money, then developing a business case isn't going to help. There's no capacity or money. Only once you know that it has a chance is it worth getting it ready for approval. The business case is properly developed, an estimated return on investment, estimated costs, which will require some form of technical analysis to understand the architecturally significant pieces of the technical strategy that impact those costs. Typically, this is scale. The architecture for 100 concurrent users is different from the architecture for 100 million concurrent users. And the costs, substantially different as well. Approved, but not all will be. Sometimes the business case doesn't add up. The timing isn't right for this idea because the organization doesn't have the capacity to handle this change. If it is approved, then the epic owner will be negotiating features into the development value stream backlogs, trying to prove that the epic is viable. This is the lean startup kicking in. Those leading indicators in the epic hypothesis statement are often descriptions of the early experiments to understand whether the change that this epic is trying to enact is going to be valuable to the organization. Prove that first. Remember that this is a lean portfolio, and the goal of lean is always value in the sustainably shortest lead time. If any of these changes aren't going to be valuable, get rid of them. They're wasting your organization's precious time and money. Time and money are finite resources, so the portfolio needs to be focused on doing the most valuable things with those finite resources. Once the hypothesis has been proven, then the organization should be extracting value from this epic. There may be ongoing development, further features being negotiated into backlogs to try to hit those business outcomes. Eventually, the development effort will drop to the level of ongoing maintenance, and it's just a case of waiting for the business outcomes to hopefully build. Successful. The epic achieved the change it intended to make, as defined through the business outcomes. Not every epic makes it this far. Success is not guaranteed. It is also success, not done. Done is that the work is over, but doing the work doesn't mean that the change has been successful. Remember, epics represent change rather than work. Work does need to be done to achieve the change, but the focus should be on the change. How do we know when to move the epic through its life cycle? There's a feedback loop running. Epics, or rather the epic owners, negotiate work into the backlogs of the agile release trains, and they're competing against other epics for space on that backlog. So they have to justify why their features are more valuable than the others, which again is lean, that pursuit of value in the sustainably shortest lead time. Features get developed and released. And when the customer starts using that release, then the epic can measure whether the changes to the solution that the feature releases have enacted, are they moving the metrics, those leading indicators and business outcomes? The changing metrics provide insight into what the epic should do next. It should negotiate features that move the metrics further still. Lean portfolio. It's not just about doing the work, it's about choosing the right work to get value delivered. You might not know up front what needs to be done. The early features will be experiments to understand what you should be doing, and they will generate later features. The later features are also experiments, testing whether they are fulfilling the customer needs and using that to adjust what is being built. And build what the customer actually needs rather than what someone thought the customer needed. This is the plan, do, check, adjust loop that's running at the portfolio level. It's safe principle 4, build incrementally with fast integrated learning cycles, and safe principle 5, base milestones on objective evaluation of working systems, because they're released, they're out there, and we're collecting the metrics about them. So that is a brief recap on what an epic is trying to do, how it's represented, the life cycle it goes through, and the feedback loops that are present. Now I'd like to apply a little bit of design thinking to explore the problem space before we charge headlong into developing a solution. Why do you need to write a better epic? This isn't a rhetorical question. This is something that you should think long and hard about. What is it that you are hoping to achieve by writing better epics? That's what we need to measure to understand whether we have truly gotten good, better epics. Some common reasons for wanting better epics. The ideas for change aren't compelling enough, can't get the changes approved or finance secured. Inability to determine whether the change has been valuable, and the change just doesn't happen. There Could be more. There probably are. I would run a quick brainstorming session within your own organization. Get all the opinions out into the open. I suspect a lot of them may map onto the abstractions presented here, but there may be some outliers and surprises lurking in your data. Use the 5 whys, the fishbone or Ishikawa technique to properly drill down on the problems. Are better written words really going to improve any of the previously mentioned outcomes? Probably not. The improvements lie elsewhere. So here's the plot twist in the middle of the presentation, the point where the presentation takes an unexpected turn. Whilst you think you might be wanting to write better epics, that isn't going to be what you really need. You may just have to face up to the fact that your idea isn't that good. Sorry. Portfolio does involve stepping back, looking at the bigger picture. What's best for the organization as a whole, not what do I want? Why aren't the ideas compelling? Are they just work to be done rather than change? Why can't that work be delegated to the agile release trains? Why doesn't the organization trust the agile release trains to do the right thing? Why aren't the right metrics and governance in place to measure them doing the right thing? You are actually running a lean portfolio and not just the old portfolio cloaked in some fancy lean buzzwords, aren't you? Why hasn't the portfolio transformed? Why don't the leadership want to change? Why weren't they incentivized to change? Transforming themselves wasn't part of the vision. What vision? Keep asking why and don't stop at 5. Stop when you hit something immutable, something that cannot be changed. Lack of clarity on the vision makes it very difficult to determine what ideas for change could move the organization towards that vision. Lack of leadership alignment on the vision means the leadership will pull the organization in different directions. And an idea that works for one direction won't be compelling for those trying to move in an opposing direction. The vision provides a target to aim for. Without the vision, it's a scattergun approach. Just keep firing enough ideas into the process to see if anything sticks. Do you have the time and resources to attempt to evaluate every conceivable idea? You need a target to aim for. Can't get the changes approved or finance secured? Why do you need to secure finance? Are we back to questioning whether you're really running a lean portfolio or just the old project processes cloaked in lean buzzwords? Just checking. Many supposed lean portfolios aren't. Once you peek beneath the cloak and see the old processes hiding underneath. There are many reasons why an epic might not be approved. Business case doesn't add up. The estimated return on investment doesn't match the estimated costs. The change doesn't contribute enough to achieving the vision. We explored ideas for change that aren't compelling enough on the previous slide. The organization might not be willing to take the risk on this change, given the amount of business risk elsewhere within the organization. Higher risks are often higher rewards. But for many organizations, that risk has to be balanced. A few high-risk things are offset by a number of low-risk things providing underlying stability. Google can do lots of high-risk experiments in AI, medicine, and other fields. Experiments that might not pay off for years, if ever. They can handle that risk because the revenue from the search engine advertising is low risk. If they didn't have that low risk income, they wouldn't be able to do as many high risk activities. Part of the approvals process is for the organization to decide how much risk it's willing to take on, given that business change isn't always guaranteed to be successful. Can you afford to absorb the cost of failure? If you've reached the point where this absolutely cannot fail, then your leadership have already failed you by leading you to that point. If you're running a lean portfolio, then you're operating a fixed capacity machine. There is only a finite amount of money and time available. SAFE somewhat assumes that the money magically appears, but ultimately the organization must earn the money that it wants to spend. And you can't spend more than you earn. I suppose you could get loans, but you must pay them back in the end, and that's coming out of future earnings. There might not be enough capacity available to do more. Ultimately, there is nothing to physically stop a portfolio approving more and more work, except for its own self-discipline. Remember, the more work approved, the more work being done in parallel, and therefore the longer it will take for the work to realize value. This is SAFE Principle 1, based decisions on economics, demonstrated through the serial and parallel game within leading or implementing SAFE. And if you do nothing else with your executives, make sure you walk them through that exercise so that they understand why work in process is so important and how it applies to them. As a rough rule of thumb, if any agile release train is doing significant work on more than one epic, then they are doing work in parallel, and that will be slowing down the delivery of those epics that they are working on. Epics are all about changing the business. Are you measuring the change that is being made? Lots of people focus on the sales pitch, the words, but the real insight is on the bottom half of the epic hypothesis statement, the metrics used to show the change expected is and has occurred. Think about this. We're trying to measure a change to the business. So those metrics are going to be business metrics. They aren't going to be the metrics that bubble up out of the agile tooling about whether trains are running. That's for the trains to worry about. These need to be true business metrics: money, sales volumes, profitability, or whatever it is that your business is looking at to know that it's being successful. Not for profit, there's usually something else that's measured instead of the money. Some years back, I worked with the UK National Health Service's Blood and Transplants Division. Now, they can't ignore the money. They need to balance the accounts on an annual basis, but the money isn't their prime driver. On the transplant side, their primary driver was the number of people whose lives have been improved by someone providing the gracious donation of their organs after they've died. At the time I was with them, they were specifically targeting a 5-to-1 ratio, 5 lives improved for the loss of one. The metrics are vitally important because whilst the sales pitch gets used once for approval, and then maybe a little bit for context setting, the metrics get used every single planning interval. They act as proof that the epic has made progress, that it's moving towards its business outcomes. If it's not achieving those business outcomes, then either pivot and try different features to get things moving again, or maybe stop. This epic has done as much as it can do, and trying to do more would just be throwing good money at a bad idea. Every planning interval, those metrics will be required to make an informed decision about whether the epic should still be in play. The challenge here is that good metrics is a topic that gets context specific very quickly. It is inexorably tied to your business because these are business metrics. How does your business perceive that it generates value? Be prepared for these to be hard to measure. Real effort will be involved in interpreting the sales accounts and extracting the useful information. Effort involved in running surveys to engage with customers to understand their needs and how they're feeling. This is part of the day job of an epic owner or an epic that's in play, gathering those metrics, providing that insight to help the wider portfolio make sensible decisions. Change is hard. So we're always looking for leading indicators to give us early insight that we're doing the right thing. Not all change is successful. There are many obstacles in the way. Epics are about changing the organization, changing it so that it can do more. Either the organization has more to offer, or what it is offering is done more efficiently. Organizational change is hard because people need to change how they work, how they behave. Every change is an experiment. You don't know whether the customers want it until you try. Remember, customers isn't always people on the street. It could be internal. It could be ourselves, the people within the organization, that are the customers of this change. And sometimes the customers don't want it. The trick is making the experiment as small as it can be to give you the insight. That's the lean startup. If the answer from the experiment is no, you've got a chance to pivot or to cut your losses before you waste any more time and money on this change. Remember, lean is all about chasing value in the sustainably shortest lead time. If there's no value in it, don't do it. We've already stated that measuring the right thing is important. The leading indicators are the early experiments, surveys to see whether the customer wants it, technical feasibility studies to understand whether the engineering is possible. Then move to thinking about how to deliver incrementally. What's the smallest that can be done to get it out there and start gaining insight? Think limited releases, maybe to family and friends that are willing to accept that it's not complete, but can use it and provide feedback nonetheless. MVPs are the experiments. What's the minimum we can do to prove the viability of this product? That's very different from a minimum marketable release, which is what you can go live with. Don't get the two confused. And even then, be really, really critical about what the minimum of your minimum marketable release is. You will want more than you need. Focus on only the absolute minimum to get the release out early and the feedback rolling in. Better words on the epic aren't going to make the change any easier, but better metrics will allow you to track that change and make informed decisions about it. Stopping an epic is not failure. Not if you stop it early before you waste your money. That should be celebrated as a success. It saved money being wasted. If you stop it late, once the money has been spent on doing wasteful work, then that is a failure. There's some psychology tied up in all of this. Do make sure that everyone in the portfolio can separate stopping from failure and that they understand the difference between the two. So in conclusion, you probably don't need to write better epics. Better metrics, yes. Better leading indicators that encourage the lean startup's experimental mindset. Better business outcomes that validate whether the change has been successful. More often than not, what needs to be done better is decision-making around the epics. The right people making the right decisions at the right time, with the right information about the change to the business. Some of that information is through the metrics, but some of that information has to come from within the portfolio. If the portfolio doesn't have a clear vision that everyone is aligned around, then it will struggle to understand whether any of the proposed changes contribute to that vision. The desire for writing good epics is a symptom. It's not the underlying root cause, and it's unlikely to be the solution. Now that epics are being handled in a good way, and by improving the processes supporting their life cycle, now we can turn to how epics get things done. Epics negotiate features into the backlogs of development value streams and the agile release trains within them. So we'll be back in 3 weeks' time on the 1st of August to explore writing better features. A recording of this webinar will be available on the agile website within a few days if you want to replay. I will also post a text version as an article on the agile website at some point. Our new AI overlords are always demanding new text to feed their collage engine. There is also a wealth of information on the agile website, particularly a deep dive on the nature of portfolios, some of which has been linked to in the QR codes here. And of course, we're always available for coaching, training, and support. Just get in touch. Now, we do have time, he says, for questions. Yes, we do. So if you do have any questions, drop them into the Q&A tool on Zoom, and we can take a look there and try and answer them. Who can play the role of epic owner? As it is not a standard role. It's a fairly standard role in the framework, but it's not a it's not a job. It's not a full-time job in the same way that once you're a product manager or release train engineer, you are always that until your sort of release train ends. People take on the role of epic ownership as and when an epic needs to be owned. Now, people playing an epic owner, there's a sort of set of skills they need. They need good connections around the organization because they're going to have to build a business case. So you're going to need things like connections in finance, in sales. You're going to need connections over on the technical side to do the technical impact analysis and therefore get some of the costings back out for that business case. So you need that level of connection. Once, if your epic is approved, then the epic owner needs to be able to negotiate features into the backlogs of agile release trains. So you need those negotiation skills, and you are competing against multiple epics potentially. So negotiation there is going to be something you need. And then finally, you've got to gather those metrics and stand by your epic. So there's a lot of skills an epic owner needs. Look for people that have those skills. If it's business related, you might be looking for people within the business space. If it's an internal epic, so more technical related, typically about improving the efficiency of the organization, that may be owned by someone from a more technical background. The only other thing to say about an epic owner is they need the time to do the job. And that is a non-trivial amount of time. Building a business case doesn't happen magically. There's real effort there. Negotiating features into backlogs, that takes effort. And given that you are then a stakeholder to the agile release train, you're going to need to be participating in planning, system demos, the other feedback cycles. So real effort there. And those metrics, they need to be gathered. That takes effort. And the activities that keep the portfolio running, particularly portfolio sync, to check that your epic is making progress, that has to be done as well. So don't underestimate the amount of time that's there. The one thing that you don't want your epic owner to be, though, is command and control, because that won't work. And it certainly won't work because you don't have any money anymore. So you can't use the money as leverage. You've got to be persuasive. It's all about persuading the other epic owners, your peers, that your features are most valuable. So that's epic owner. Ooh, what is a good ratio of epics that reach extract and ultimately success in your experience? That's an interesting one, because a lot of my experience comes from having to try and transition existing portfolios. So we're already in the middle of things, and things are happening and will happen regardless of any sort of decision making that we're ultimately trying to instigate in an organization. I don't always get to see the later stages, unfortunately. But if you're going to get rid of ideas, you want to do it as early as you can in the process. But you still need to provide the lean portfolio management, the um, the decision makers within the portfolio with those options, with those ideas, so they can pick and choose between them. It's at that point, getting into approved is where you'd expect to see most of the failures to occur. Typically, once it does get into approved, it's going to stick. Unless it is deliberately something that is being approved so that you can run the experiments knowing that it is at risk. So a lot of it is really context specific. The important part is actually to have the process in place so you can make these decisions, that it really is running a lean startup mindset. And more importantly, the right people are present to make the decisions about, do we continue? That has to be the decision makers, the executives in the lean portfolio. It's not something that can be delegated out. It has to be the people that set the vision. Okay. What if there is only one agile release train? Do you really need a portfolio at that point? Probably not, because you've got one release train, one set of work. You just need a backlog of features. Sometimes it helps to have an epic within the agile release train because it provides the context for a group of features. It provides the metrics, those business outcomes, those leading indicators to give you insight that this collection of features is moving you towards some common business goals. Now, if you're at that stage, then the agile release train itself, the epic is really there for convenience. And indeed, a colleague of mine, Ian Spence, has coined that phrase, epic of convenience, because it provides a convenient grouping and measurement and context setting artifact. Do you need to actually have a portfolio that is looking at that one epic for that one release train? No, not really. The release train can own all of it itself. And indeed, you might even still encounter that scenario. Even if you have a portfolio of multiple agile release trains, there may be times when they're owning things themselves that are local to them, predominantly local to them, and they just want to use the epic as a convenient container for grouping things together, but it doesn't need portfolio level visibility and decision making. Oh, here's a good one. In the spirit of just get started, how far can a transformation really go before finance is forced to adopt LPM or the transformation stalls? It all depends how much you can secure permission just to get running, to get going, and ignore some of the financial rules that are already in place. If you've already got a block of money to keep an agile release train going, that's enough. That's enough to get going. Once you've got multiple agile release trains, you need to balance the distribution of money across those agile release trains to try and put the money where you need the resources in order to fulfill the vision. Now, often distribution of that money isn't really a finance job. It ends up being the job of line managers and other management within the organization. They're the ones who work out how to distribute the money. I get a little bit annoyed because everyone calls that budgeting, and it's not. It's really distribution of money. Your actual finance department is a lot more concerned often with cash flow. For the money you've got coming in, and when we're going to get that money coming in, does it match the money going out on the wage bill, on the licenses and other outgoings, and making sure that there's enough cash in the right place to pay everyone at the end of the month? How it all gets distributed internally is an internal problem. So, turn that round and what can you own yourself? And what's really yours and what's being imposed upon you on outside? And more often than not, it's our own rules. It's rules set up by our own management. Okay, if an epic is an enabler epic, what sort of metrics and outcomes can be considered? Now, this gets interesting because what is an enabler epic? It's not preparation for the future. If you want to do preparation for the future, that should be part of whatever that future epic is, because epics are not constrained to a time box, they span out through time. That preparation should actually be part of the main epic. And if you think about it, the business outcomes, the preparation, are going to be the business outcomes of the main epic. So they are all one and the same. Enabler epics are internal epics that we want to do, internal value, I would suggest. And that is going to be efficiency of the organization. So the metrics on enabler epics, they're not going to be new money, but they're going to be, are we using the money we've already got more efficiently? Can we do more with what we already have? I suppose if you are being ruthless management, then you could have a smaller workforce and still do the same. But let's be nice and assume that the aim is to do more with what we've already got. That's what enabler ethics are trying to do. So it's efficiency metrics. You are able to get more done. You're able to process more, or whatever that may be. Now, again, the actual metrics are going to be exceedingly context specific because it's whatever your organization does. But that's what you'd be looking at there. Okay. Are the epic owner and the epic writer the same or a different role? Yes, and yes. Um, so they could be the same person. The person that suggested the epic could then go on and own it. But equally, it could be different people. Often, the ideas for an epic have come from different places in the organization, and they will be different to the person that actually owns the epic and sees it through the life cycle. If you consider that when you're setting the vision and you know where you are now and where you want to be as defined by the vision, that's a delta you're trying to cross, and it's epics that cross that delta, then the ideas for the epics have probably come from the people setting the vision. And they're not necessarily going to be the people that own the epic day to day and do the footwork of building the business case, getting approval, and if it is approved, then negotiating features in and gathering metrics back out. So I would expect them to be potentially to be the ideas to be owner of the idea to be different from the epic owner. Do the epics change when a government is using agile? No, it's all about changing the business, the organization. So epic, it's just a change to the organization. In the case of a government, it's not fresh money, is it? It's well, unless you're the tax department. I've worked with enough tax departments. Anyhow, regardless, it's typically how are you doing more? How are you serving your populace better with the money you've got? And therefore, the metrics that you are looking at when you're changing your organization, your government department, is whatever it is in terms of services that your government department provides. Are you doing it better than before? And I know better is one of those awful subjective words, but whatever better is in the context of the change you're enacting. Yeah, epics are just about changing the business. It doesn't even have to be a software change underneath, an engineering change. It's just about changing the business. Can I use the rules of writing an epic even if my organization doesn't work within the SAFe framework? Well, obviously, the Scaled Agile company would love you to be paying for the framework through the training and stuff. But in reality, yeah, you can use the SAFe epic and the formats, even if you're not using the SAFe framework. Indeed, there is a distinct separation between portfolio and the delivery systems below. You could be running a lean portfolio and using the SAFe advice for running a lean portfolio, but ultimately it could be negotiating work into projects if it had to. Development value streams are better for long-lived things like software systems that exist for years to decades. But sometimes projects might be the right mechanic to be using down there because it is truly a one-off change. Yeah, portfolio ultimately doesn't care how things get done. That's for the people doing the stuff to worry about. What it cares is that it's getting the results back, that the change to the organization that it's after are actually happening. So there is a complete separation there, and you can use the SAFe portfolio advice and SAFe epics for anything that is change to the business. Oh, would you limit the size of an epic? Split the epic into smaller epics so that it fits into a time box? No. And be careful about that. Lots of people want to split their epics up so that they are smaller, because smaller is how you game the way to shortest job first and get your piece of work prioritized. But you run into the problem that if you start splitting it down, is it still valuable? Is it going to enact the change you are after? If after it's been split, it can still enact the change, then do it. By all means do. But if by splitting it up, you lose that value, and it needs to be a set of these things to get back to the overall value you're after, then I wouldn't split it up. And we don't need to, do we? Because epics are entitled to span across time boxes. They can span across the organization. That's the rules behind them. Use the features. It's the features that have to fit within the time boxes, and then use the metrics to measure progress. The features you've done, have they actually given you insight that this epic, this change is actually going to be successful? It's going to achieve what you set out to achieve. So it's those metrics that you measure every time box in order to give the insight that the epics should continue, but the epic can continue across. And think it through. Can you change your organization in the 10 or 12 weeks of a normal planning interval? That's hard. Business change, building new revenue streams takes real time. So actually, we tend to find that epics have to span through time. Head to the agile website. Somewhere in on the nature of portfolios, that very topic is discussed, splitting epics and why it might not be the right thing to do. Okay. Do you have tips and tricks for making high-level estimations for the cost versus benefits analysis? Over and above the usual advice? Not really. We tend to like relative estimation. So we're always wanting to compare back to things we've already done, particularly for costs. A lot of organizations, although they are developing new products, new things, they are somewhat similar to products they've already developed before. So you can look at the costs, the effort, the metrics that came from developing things that have already gone and try to relatively position this one against things you've already done. But remember, they are just high-level estimations. They're our best guess. As we go further through the process, those guesses can be revised. Your first high-level estimation, Couple of million, I reckon, given the way the wind is currently blowing. That's what you'd stick on the epic hypothesis statement to have something that's forecastable. And all we're doing is reserving space in the timeline, potentially space from the available funds to be able to do this in the future. As you build the business case and people actually put real thought into, well, how many units are we going to shift? What do we think our sales are going to be? And they put real insight into what the technical solutions could potentially be, and therefore the costs around them, you'll get revised estimates back. Do they look similar to what we started out with now that we've done some more analysis on it? Maybe, maybe not. If the answer's no, then you need to go back and revisit the economic logic, don't you? Do you still want this? Is it still worth pursuing? Or should we pursue another opportunity? We've not wasted much effort on it yet. So this is the point where killing the bad ideas is useful. You know, that's what's actually saving you from failures. You sort of have to presume the epics are guilty until the metrics presume them, prove them otherwise, basically. But then once you are actually in development, it's the lean startup, which is then taking over. You know, you are spending money by developing stuff, but you are gaining insight, metrics back, which is why those metrics are so important. If you're just doing work without the metrics to show the work is doing useful, providing useful things to the company, that's when you're in trouble, because then you're just blindly spending money. I know that's how companies always used to work, but that's not what lean is all about. Lean is all about chasing that value. So get value back into the discussions. At the end of the day, the wage bill is going out the door at the end of the month, whether you like it or not. You can't not pay the wage bill. Well, I guess you could try not paying the wage bill. Let me know where I should send the flowers. I serve in a Fortune 100 financial services company, which is not public. We're in a highly regulated industry. There is a cultural issue in our context where our board of directors and execs want 3 to 5 year rolling wave planning where benefits and budgets are locked in as commitments. Not very lean. Where can you reframe the conversation to create mindset openness? The impermeable mindset seems to rule and reign in my context. I would look back to your history. Have those 3 to 5 year rolling wave plannings that you've tried to lock down, how long have they ever remained locked for? I suspect not that long, and things will change. And those changes as much are likely to come from the leadership, the directors and execs, as they are from external influences on the outside. So what I would be trying to do is to rephrase the conversation. The 3 to 5 year rolling wave planning isn't wrong. It's actually a good thing to have. You want to know where you're going in the future. That is providing your vision. But it's the vision, it's the locking that vision down that is causing the problems, because there's too much change that can happen in the next 3 to 5 years. Anything could happen. Fortune 100, financial services. I'm going to guess you're American, okay? There's a presidential election coming up. And having read the news reports recently, anything could happen. I don't want to get into the politics of all that, but what's that going to do to your 3 to 5 year rolling wave planning? It's going to be torn to pieces, isn't it? So you've got to just get them into the mindset that the planning itself is good. Locking it in just isn't going to work. So let's not make a commitment to it. But what you do want to do is have those metrics for the things you think you're going to be doing. Are we actually achieving them? When we say we're going to do them, are we achieving them? And be honest, transparent. And if change needs to happen, explain why the change needs to happen. But it's probably the mindset. Ultimately, there'll be the mindset there. They think if it's locked in, it will happen. And that's not how engineering works. It's not how problem solving works. You need to get them slowly. And this is where we're talking about behavioral change and people change. And the only way to do that is the long, hard, slow way of talking to people and slowly discussing it with them and getting them round to it. So there's no magic bullet there, I'm afraid. It's just engaging with them. Right. It looks like there's a whole heap of answers still to go, and I'm run out of time. It's 5 o'clock. But I'll have a look through. I will try and answer more of these offline, get some responses back to you all. I hope for those that I did manage to answer, that was useful. I hope you've enjoyed it all and it's been worthwhile. Do join us in 3 weeks' time, 1st of August. I will talk about how do we get features negotiated into the development value stream backlogs, and what do you really need in a feature in order to take it into PI planning and get the engineers to work with it. So have a good one. Hopefully see you all in a few weeks' time.